Vijay Iyer, thank you for joining Jazz Club Jury here at the Tampere Jazz happening.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Congratulations, first of all, for winning 5 categories of Downbeat's International Critics Poll. What does that mean to you as a musician?
Oh, it's a spectacular honor and quite a surprise, to see it all pile up like that. And very validating, for all the work I've been doing over the years and the efforts of my colleagues to expand the music that I've been feeding them and making it better than what I made it. And all the work we've done on the road, and we've kind of been busting our asses. So it's validating. It's a beautiful reward. And the other thing is that it mainly creates new opportunities for us, which I'm really excited about. So getting to come here for the first time, for example.
Well, it's good to have you here.
Thanks.
Where did the title Accelerando come from?
It's actually just the name of one of the pieces that's on the album. And that piece is characterized by the word accelerando, if you see it in notated music, it means get faster. Of course, that's what it means. Yeah. It's an Italian word. It's Italian because a lot of musical terms are in Italian.
Yeah.
Or actually it means getting faster. That's what it means. So while getting faster. It's like a gerund, I guess, or an adverb maybe. Acceleratingly or something. So that, when you see it, if you're a trained musician, you see it, then it switches something on in you. It's not like you see the word and you think about something.
It's more emotional.
You see the word and you are impelled to act. It's almost like your pulse quickens and things like that. I guess what I wanted was a title that wouldn't just describe the album, but would actually kind of activate you. And that piece called Accelerando, or Accelerando, was written for a choreographer. So I had this kind of daft idea. I created a short suite in collaboration with a choreographer.
It was a dance piece.
It was.
Yeah. Okay.
I had this daft idea of making them dance to an accelerating pulse. And they loved it. They actually worked with it, and it was cool. They were so super sharp. And it was amazing, the feeling of being on stage with them and having them fly through the air and land with us. In these it's an accelerating pulse, so the relationships are very strange. But they got it. They just got it. They just lived in it, It was
incredible.
It's fabulous.
You started playing violin at 3, and then piano by ear. What made you choose the piano after the violin, in terms of the choice of musical instrument that you were going to then focus on?
Oh, it was there. It was just, I only started playing it because it was there. Because my sister was taking piano lessons. So it was around for me to bang on, and it was a way of being an annoying younger brother to my sister. And I just figured things out on my own without really any major goals. It was just something that I did kind of in between everything else. And it was very unofficial, it wasn't ever... For example, no one in my family can tell me when I started playing piano because it wasn't really regarded as an official activity of mine that that they signed me up for or anything. It was more like
because you started studying.
It was almost like playing with the furniture or something like that.
What were your biggest influences?
Well, when I was growing up, I listened to a lot of pop and rock and early hip hop. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, so, Michael Jackson was a big influence. Prince was a big influence. The Police were a big influence.
Interesting.
And everything kind of radiating outward from all of those guys. And yeah, like Run DMC and Public Enemy. And then, when I was in high school, we had a really nice jazz music, just a nice music program all around. I was in the orchestra, and there was a concert band, and then there was a jazz ensemble, and they let me into the jazz ensemble initially as the second pianist, but there was only one piano, so I played vibes my first year. So that's a little known fact about me, is that I was once a vibes player, and thus it shall stay. but that gave me a chance to check it out in earnest and at length, and mess around with my peers and try to figure things out together. We would hack through standards in the real book and so on. But then also because of that, I started checking out a lot of records from the local library. And it was the mid-'80s, so it started with Herbie Hancock and Wynton Marsalis. And then again, it just sort of radiated outward from there, So I would look at, these guys are playing this tune called Well You Needn't, and another one called Round Midnight by some guy named Thelonious Monk. I was like, who's that? So, and also, I remember this album it was Herbie Hancock's quartet album, but it had Ron Carter and Tony Williams and Wynton on it. So
nice.
Then I ended up getting Wynton's albums. I also ended up getting more of Herbie's albums, reaching back into the Miles Davis years, and then finding out more about Miles and then about Coltrane, and then also the Monk stuff. And Monk was probably the biggest and still is my biggest influence.
Okay.
I think about him all the time and all the choices he made and innovations with sound and rhythm and form. He was one of the greatest artists in any discipline of the 20th century. And so then everybody in his lineage, like Duke Ellington, Andrew Hill, Randy Weston, Bud Powell, McCoy Tyner, Cecil Taylor.
Andrew Hill used to call you up after gigs, didn't he?
He did.
What were you talking about?
Talk about all the mistakes I made. No, he would talk to me about my choices,
Okay.
It was a kind of mentorship. He was very generous and very supportive, but also very wise and sly, and he would say things about just the specific choices I was making about where I was playing, who was in my band, what I was wearing, things like that.
Not music related.
It was sort of about respecting myself.
Yeah.
Ultimately, was what it was. And he wanted me to take the whole enterprise seriously, and give it the dignity it deserves. That's basically what it was about.
Would you say you found yourself in the music that you're playing now, as opposed to the music that you were playing at the beginning of your career with your collaborations with Rudresh Mahantapa? I mean, in terms of when you guys were playing together, what I get from it was that you were trying to figure out the identity that you guys had initially as musicians, and then you stopped playing together and started doing your own things, and you were no longer, I read somewhere that the people used to refer to you as the guys.
Well, it's not that, I mean, we still play together. We didn't stop playing together, but I think it was finally that, because both of us had projects as leaders, and we were both starting to become more active, where we couldn't really both do everything, I couldn't make all of his gigs, and he couldn't make all of mine. So then we sort of had to make choices just to stay on track as individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, all the work that we've done together over the last 16 or 17 years has been really pivotal for both of us. And it has, I think in the long run, it's made a difference in the field. I mean, partly in the sense that I encounter more and more people who are a generation younger than us, you know, in their early 20s, who are in a similar predicament, you could say, of being having a similar background or some other kind of non-Western background that's neither European American nor African American, and finding a place for yourself in the arts world as a creative musician, and making the alliances that you choose to make to and making the choices artistically. And I've found that a lot of such people are very influenced by the work that we've done, you know? And so that's been, I think I'd say it's been validating, you know, to see that the work has mattered to another generation of people, that it wasn't just about ourselves, you know. And I wouldn't say that the primary objective of our music together was to negotiate identity. I mean, the primary objective was to make
music together,
to make good music that was interesting to us and that was authentic to who and what we were, which is very complex, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that we were Indian American. I mean, it's very much that, but what does that say to you exactly? I mean, India's a big place, and America's a big place. So you cross those two together, what do you get? You get actually quite a lot of different possible manifestations. It's more about creative inquiry, you know, as people in the diaspora living in a city like New York, which is hugely diverse to begin
and
with.
complex, and
has been for a long time.
Yeah. I read that you were also a physics PhD graduate, and you studied math and physics as opposed to going to a musical establishment to get training.
Well, my PhD is not in physics.
Musical science,
my
or
undergrad,
the science of music.
Yeah, I mean, my undergrad was in physics,
Right.
and then I entered a PhD program in physics. But this was 20 years ago that I entered the PhD program, and eventually, after a couple of years, as I started to realize or come to terms with the new possibilities that were appearing in my life, I decided that music would work as a way of life, you know. Whereas previous to that, I didn't know it would. But so along the way, I had started out on track to become a scientist, you know.
A jazz scientist?
Well, no, just a physicist, you know,
Okay.
like somebody, I was going to be a theoretical physicist. I don't know if I ever would have been a great one. I think I probably would have struggled and maybe had to make some difficult choices. But anyway, I was doing reasonably well. I was getting good grades, though that's not what makes you a good scientist. And I was involved in some research projects. But I realized that music was going to be the real thing for me, the center of my life, and all the choices that I would make would be around that. So then that meant leaving the physical sciences behind. And so I was going to leave academia entirely. Then I connected with somebody who helped me put together my own PhD program, which was an interdisciplinary effort focusing on the cognitive science of music, which is actually information that's useful to all of us. I mean, all of us who make music and to all of us who care about music.
So you're the best person to ask about what is rhythm.
I don't know if I'm the best. I'm probably not the best. I'm definitely not the best. But I have some thoughts anyway, and that those thoughts, those ideas have guided a lot of my work as an artist for the last 14 or so years, 15 years.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how you use the Fibonacci sequence in some of your music? Because I found that fascinating.
Well, I mean that's just an example of a structure, basically a compositional idea that is using some constraints and some extra musical concepts to arrive at some kind of discovery through the arts, you know. That's all it is. It's not, I'm not somebody who thinks that there's some kind of mystical power in the Fibonacci sequence. I was interested in some of its properties, like it has this interesting scaling property where you can kind of chain them together and then you have sort of self-similarity. You can basically make a big Fibonacci number out of lots of little ones. Okay, so then as you keep going in, you keep finding versions of the same ratio everywhere. So that was kind of what intrigued me about some of the rhythmic ideas we work with that draw from that. Was that you'd have something that's basically similar sounding. I mean, because like when you want to create something that sounds similar to something else, there's no obvious way to do it. I mean, like, what is a musical sketch of another piece of music? You know, like it's a little bit of a strange concept.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to do a drawing that has some similarity to something else, or like a sketch of something else, or some version of another thing. But to do it in music, I guess this kind of versioning principle, to do it with this kind of slightly more detailed scaffolding or detailed structure underlying it, to me it just kind of activated it in an interesting way. I don't know if you want me sitting here clapping out rhythms for you. That's what the music is for. You know? I don't think we need a little tutorial of that kind. But.
I heard just recently Adam Rudolph talking about how jazz is no longer used as a creative term anymore, and we should look beyond what jazz is and create a new model for it. I mean, do you think that there's a change happening within jazz currently?
I think at any given time, throughout the history of this music, there have been people who wanted to commodify it, and there have been people who wanted to transform it. And I am more interested in the artists who work to transform it, not just to transform it, but to transform themselves and to transform our relationship to music and our understanding of the world. So that's kind of what it's about for me, you know. And the word jazz, I think, refers to the commodifying tendency and that history of sales of music. It's a business term is what it is to me. Which isn't to say that we're not also doing business, you know. I mean, I play at jazz festivals, I'm on a jazz record label, and I get written about in jazz magazines, so it would be kind of bullshit for me to say I'm not a jazz musician. But
some people just call themselves artists or creatives.
Well, I think that from the perspective of process,
yeah,
of anyone engaged in process, no category is useful. It's not about, because the categories are not authentic to the creative communities. They're imposed from without. They're kind of terminology that's imposed from without in order to encapsulate, commodify, distribute, that kind of thing. That's what it really is. You could say make sense, but I don't know that you need it to make sense of what's happening. It's more a shorthand that's a little bit abusive in the long run because it kind of reduces what's really happening. Oh, that's just jazz. You guys are just playing jazz, right? I mean, I hear that phrase, I hear that worded that way constantly. And it usually means that people aren't really going to listen carefully to what you're trying to say. You know? So that's kind of, you know, the people I've been influenced by in this field are people who largely rejected that term. So, and at the same time, we're all in this community together. So if there, you know, I guess like that word to me refers to the history of the community too. And there's this huge recorded archive, there's a history of ideas. There are people in a community trying to make a difference, you know, and trying to change the world. So that, you know, I guess if the J word, as some people you call it, refers to that whole, if it can encompass that whole thing without reducing it, then, you know, there's a place for it. I've gone back and forth with it. I mean, Butch Morris, I was on a panel with Butch Morris earlier this year, and he actually said that he was a jazz musician. And he said that he couldn't not call himself a jazz musician because all the people who influenced him and taught him everything he knows were jazz musicians. So it starts to be this, it can be a sort of circular statement after, you know, but I think the people he looks up to, the people who taught him everything he knows, identified with it. So then he feels that that community and that legacy and that history has given him the strength to do what he does, which itself is something so far-ranging and beyond category, you know, that it's hard to put a label on it. So I guess if we understand that the word is not a style of music or a kind of music or anything like that, but really the history of a people and different moments of transformation and strategies for transformation, then it's as open as I understand it to be. You know, if the word means that, then it makes sense to me. But that, unfortunately, it just doesn't mean that to a lot of people.
What advice would you give to the young coming through into the jazz scene? Let's say at the Sibelius Academy, who are at, you know, they have a top class profile when it comes to the jazz department.
I mean, I can only speak from my own perspective, which I didn't go to jazz school. I didn't go to music school. I studied a lot of things beyond music, and I still do. And I think I think that one reason people sign up for these programs is that they're led to believe that there is some stable and inexhaustible field of opportunities on the other side, in the professionally, basically, that you can get one of these degrees and then become a professional jazz musician and get out there and travel around the world. And the field doesn't work that way. And in particular, you can't become active in this field by trying to be, well, how should I put it? I mean, I think you can't really think about the business of the music. You have to think about making something that the world needs. And they might only need it for a short time, and you have to be kind of willing to take that risk. Or they might not need it at all. You know, but you have to, that has to be what your goal is, not to make jazz that fits the norms of some jazz community, but actually to make something for the world, you know. And you can't do that if you don't know what the world is or what's happening in the world, if you don't know anything else about the world besides some myopic academic perspective on jazz. Because you don't learn how to make this music except by doing it in the world. And you also don't learn about the world except by being in it, you know. So the peril of entering a conservatory program in jazz is that it actually isolates you instead of connecting you to the rest of the world. So you kind of, for me, the best path for me, even though it was a very long path, and I don't know how much longer it'll go, but finding out as much as I could about many different fields of inquiry, of knowledge, many systems of knowledge, and letting those inspire me to create something that hopefully would eventually matter at some level to somebody, you know. Beyond, basically setting my sights beyond the jazz community, but more trying to launch it into the world at large. And if the jazz community follows, that's great. And if anybody in the world responds, that's great too. But you can't count on either one, really. I guess what's worked for me the most is just trying to make something that's meaningful to me, but also trying to transform myself, you know, trying to grow, create something that makes me grow, you know, create something, some piece of music that I cannot play. And then how do you create it if you can't play it? Well, you study some other systems of knowledge that help give you creative ideas, you know. So learning about music perception and cognition was useful to me for that reason. Learning about mathematics, learning about visual art and about literature and about philosophy and history, and just engaging with the world. And then collaborating with people who are smarter than me and more talented than me.
How did you meet your trio? How did the trio get together? The one that you're working in currently for Accelerando.
Well, I started working with the bass player in the late 90s, like not long after I moved to New York in '99. And the drummer who is with me tonight, he's not the usual trio drummer, but he's worked with me since 2000 I think, 2001. And we've done a lot of things together. And he often substitutes for our usual drummer. So it's Tyshawn Sori who's on drums tonight, and Stefan Crump on bass. So we met each other through the network or the community of musicians in New York City, and have just been collaborating ever since and finding ways,
finding time, similar thought processes about the way that you work and your thoughts on, you know, jazz, philosophy, math?
I think so, yeah. I mean, yeah, they do. You know, I mean, Tyshawn, I think, is the most voracious, pan-stylistic genius I've ever met. I mean, he's, I think, the most talented musician I've ever met. And he knows a lot about, I mean, I remember first time he came over to my house, you know, we did a session and he was playing drums, but at some point he came over to the piano, started playing Stockhausen Klavierstücke, which, and then he started doing then he started playing something else. I said, what is that? I recognize that. Oh, that's me. He was actually like, he was just copying like a little fragment of a solo from one of my albums that I didn't even know he had. And then he started doing some other stuff. He was basically improvising, and I was like, there's some order. What is that? What's he doing? And then he slowed it down for me, and he was actually doing a 12-tone improvisation. Like, it was actually like fully rigorous serialist improv. So, you know, and as a composer, like he's also a great composer, and he and I work together in Fieldwork, which is a collective trio, a different project. We play a lot of his music, which is some of the most challenging music I've ever played. It's intensely polyrhythmic and very, has a lot of mystery in it, a lot of detail and precision, and it's intense, you know. And he's just like, as a drummer, he's got this, he's demonic, I think is the word. He brings this incredible intensity to every moment, and he's such a pure, authentic improviser, very much in the moment. And he's also a man of extremes, so if you want to push the music in a certain direction, he'll push it harder. He'll take it even beyond what you think is possible. So those kinds of, you know, these kinds of encounters and, you know, having relationships with people like this has been a blessing, you know. And so I've tried to cultivate these kinds of relationships with people I really believe in and trust and respect and am in awe of. So, you know, and they're not just in music. I mean, not just in jazz, not just in music, in other fields too. So these different kinds of collaborations across disciplines have also been very meaningful for me.
I can't wait to hear you now.
Cool. All right.
Vijay, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And it was great to get an insight into your view on jazz. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.